Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is our sixth lecture. What is hazard? A hazard is a situation that poses a level of threat of life, health, property, or environment. Hazards can be dormant or potential, with only a theoretical risk of harm. However, once a hazard becomes active, it can create an emergency. A hazardous situation that has come to pass is called an incident. Hazard and possibility interact together to create task risk. A hazard is simply a condition or a set of circumstances that presents a potential for harm. Hazards are divided into two broad categories. Health hazards cause occupational illnesses. Safety hazards cause physical harm, injuries. There are different types of hazards and are generally labeled as one of five types: physical hazard, chemical hazard, biological hazard, physiological hazards, and these are different examples. We will study all these hazards one by one. Number one, physical hazards. Physical hazards are conditions or situations that can cause the body physical harm or intense stress. Physical hazards can be both natural and human made elements. Chemical hazards. Chemical hazards are substances that can cause harm or damage to the body, property, or the environment. Chemical hazards can be both natural and human made origin. Third one is biological hazards. Biological hazards are biological agents that can cause harm to the human body. Some biological agents can be viruses, parasites, bacteria, food fungi, and foreign toxins. Physiological hazards. Physiological hazards are created during work related stress or a stressful environment. A person can be a hazard when he/she is affected physiological disturbance through stress shift patterns, and also can be a hazard when a person is under the influence of alcohol, illness, and lack of training. Here are some examples of hazards. These hazards are electrical hazards. You can see in the diagram different wires are there, different plugs are there. These are also examples of hazards which are physical. You can see different diagrams which shows the physical hazards. These are also physical hazards: slips and falls, loud noises, heat, high temperature, all these are the physical hazards. Fire. Fire also is a hazard. These are also hazards related to biological. These are also examples of hazards related to chemical. Examples of hazards which are related to chemical. These are the examples of hazards which are ergonomics. You can see in the diagram which is in the middle the wrong way and the right way. examples of hazards which are physiological. Here we have a safety code related to safety. The safety of the people shall be the highest law. This is a safety code. Effect of hazards on work process. In a well-balanced operation, worker equipment and material are brought together to the work environment to produce a product or perform a service. When an accident interrupts an operation, it sets in motion a different chain of events and carries its own price tag. An accident is unplanned, undesired event, not necessarily resulting in injury but damaging to property and or interrupting the activity in process. An accident increases the time needed to complete the job, reduces the efficiency and effectiveness of operation and raises the production cost. If the accident results in injury, material waste, equipment damage, or other property loss, there is a further increase in operational cost and a decrease in effectiveness. What is risk? As in the first slide, we have studied that what is risk. We can see that a hazardous situation that has come to pass is called an incident. Hazard and possibility interact together to create risk. Now in this slide, we will define what is risk. These all are the examples of different hazards. Now again, we are on the slide. What is risk? Risk is the possibility or chance of loss, danger or injury. Risk is the potential for uncontrolled loss of something of value. Values can be gained or lost when taking risk resulting from a given action or inaction, foreseen or unforeseen. Risk can also be defined as the international interaction with uncertainty. An example of risk is a teenage boy on a car. An example of risk is a vacation in the Middle East during a war. Again, risk definition. Risk equals to consequences resulting from the release of a hazard multiplied by probability of the occurrence of that event. Risk assessment. Following are the 5 steps process for risk assessment. Identify the hazards. Identify who can be harmed. Identify the current controls and decide if more is required. Record your findings. Review as necessary. These all are the 5-step process for risk assessment. The first point, identify the hazard. The first thing you need to do is identify the hazards associated with the task or activity. One way of doing this is by using PEME, P-E-M-E. P stands for people, E stands for equipment, M stands for materials, and E stands for environment. The second point is people hazard. Identify who can be harmed. People hazards cover a number of issues. Hazards are to do with the individual themselves. When thinking about people hazards, words such as training, capabilities, restrictions, supervision, communication, educate numbers and human error should come to mind. Equipment hazards. Equipment hazards cover tasks associated with the repair, maintenance, handling, cleaning, storage and operation of the equipment. Material hazards cover any solids, liquids or gases associated with the task. Example chemicals, solids, fuel, paper, wood, etc. Along with the substance that are required for the specific task. Also any byproduct or wastes generated by the task or activity. Environmental hazards. It's all about the surroundings, depending on the location and activity. Hazards could include poor lighting, poor lighting, heating and ventilation, poor access, tripping, slipping hazards, restricted space, visibility, and other activities taking place nearby. What are the current controls? What controls measures are currently in place for each hazard identified? There may be no controls, perhaps because the hazard hasn't been considered. There may be good controls in place because the hazard is obvious and easily controlled. Controls can be at three levels. Physical controls, example metal fence around a construction site. Procedural controls, example safe working procedure for the task. Behavioral controls, example educate supervision and monitoring of behavior. What are the current controls? Under this heading we have to study, are further controls required? Ask yourself, can more be done? What other control measures are necessary? Look at the hierarchy of controls. Eliminate the hazard, substitute the hazard, contain the hazard at source, remove employee from hazard. Reduce exposures to hazard, warning signals, PPE, disciplines. Choose the best, most effective controls. You may have looked at a particular task, identified the current controls, and may be thinking about adding extra controls. But how do you know which controls measures are best? This is the risk evaluation matrix. You can see how we can evaluate the risk evaluation matrix. In this matrix we have different fields. Horizontally we can see that frequency of occurrences, very common, frequent, occasional, rare. And in vertical columns you can see severity, fatal, then major injury, then moderate injury, minor injury, trivial injury. So we can see the different levels of injury, high, medium, low, different intensities are there. You can see in this diagram the probability of and severity of the risk here. the low risk show the green color, and the yellow color shows the medium risk, and high risk is shown by red color. Here is a activity diagram. In the live session, I will ask question from this diagram. What are the risk and hazard in the photo? You have to see, concentrate on this. You have to see this photo. You have to concentrate on this photo and check that what are the risk and hazard in this photo. I will ask in the next class, inshallah, in the live session. What is the emergency planning? Emergency planning is the process of assessing risk, creating plans for identified risk, and implementing mitigation measures to better prepare a community for an incident. An emergency plan specifies procedures for handling sudden or unexpected situations. The objective is to be prepared to prevent fatalities and injuries, reduce damage to buildings, stocks, and equipment. How to plan for emergencies? Developing an emergency action plan, EAP. E stands for emergency, A stands for action, and P stands for plan, is a major step in preparing for emergencies. A preliminary step to conduct a thorough analysis to determine various types of emergencies that might occur. A company might anticipate emergencies like fires, chemical spills, explosions, toxic emissions, train derailment, hurricanes, tornadoes, lightning, floods, earthquakes, or volcanic eruption. EAP should be collection of small plans for each anticipated or potential emergency. Components of EAP. Procedures. Specific step-by-step emergency response procedures for each potential emergency. Coordination. Proper coordination with emergency responder agencies. Assignments, responsibilities. Third one. Every person's responsibilities clearly spelled out and understood. One person responsible for conducting evacuation of the affected area, another for the immediate shutdown of all equipment, another for telephoning for medical, fire, and other type of emergency assistance. Always to have a backup person for each area of responsibility. Components of EAP. Accident prevention strategies. Strategies that are supposed to be used on a day-to-day basis to prevent the type of emergency being planned be developed. Strategies can be reviewed, thereby promoting prevention. Schedules, dates, and times of regularly scheduled practice drills. Vary the times and dates so that practice drills don't become predictable and boring. Here is we have a EAP performer. In this performer we can see different points. Number one, type of emergency being planned for. These emergencies are fire, flood, tornado, earthquake, hurricane, lightning, explosion, volcanic, volcanic eruption, chemical spill, toxic emission, train derailment. After type of emergency being planned for, we have procedure for emergency response. Number one, controlling and isolating. Number two, communication. Number three, emergency assistance. Number four, first aid. Number five, shutdown, evacuation, protection of workers. Number six, protection of property, equipment and property. Egress, ingress, exit, emergency equipment, example fire extinguishers, etc. Alarms, number 9, and number 10, restoration of normal operations. These all are the procedures for emergency response. The next one is coordination. Number one, medical care providers. Number two, fire service providers. Number three, LEPC personnel. Number four, environmental protection personnel. Number five, civil defense personnel in the case of public evacuation. Number six, police protection providers. And number seven, communication personnel. After the coordination, then we have assignments, responsibilities. Who cares for the injured? Who calls for emergency assistance? Who shuts down power or operations? Who coordinates communication? Who conducts the evacuation? Who meets and guides emergency responders? Who contacts coordinating agencies and organizations? Who is responsible for ensuring that alarms are in proper working order? Who is responsible for organizing cleanup activities? Then, accident prevention strategies. What are the accident prevention strategies? Number one, periodic safety inspection. Number two, industrial hygiene strategies, personal protective equipment, ergonomic strategies, machine safeguards, hand portable power tool safeguards, material handling and storage strategies, electrical safety strategies, fire safety strategies, chemical safety strategies. Then we have schedules, date of practice drills, time of practice drills, duration of practice drills. So this is a performer of EA. Emergency Response Team, ERT. A special team that responds to general and localized emergencies to facilitate personal evacuation and safety shutdowns, building services and utilities. Work with responding civil authorities. ERT typically composed of representatives from several different departments such as maintenance, security, health and safety, production, processing and medical. Actual composition depend on the size and type of company in question. An ERN is a network, emergency response network, ERN. An ERN is a network of ERT that covers a designated geographical area and is typically responsible for a specific type of emergency. What is lockout tagout? Lockout tagout is a hazard avoidance technique used to prevent energy from being accidentally released during the servicing of equipment. The lockout tagout standard requires the adoption and implementation of written practices and procedures to shut down equipment, isolate it from its energy source or sources, prevent the release of potentially hazardous energy while maintenance and servicing activities are being performed. Following are the types of lockout devices. Number one, key and combination locks. Number two, ball valve locks. Number three, gate valve locks. Number four, group lockout hasp. Then we have circuit breaker locks, valve and wheel covers. So all these are the types of lockout devices. Lockout tagout procedures are required if a worker must remove or bypass machine guards or other safety devices, or a worker is required to place any part of their body into a point of operation or into a danger zone associated with the machine's operation. Examples of activities where proper lockout tagout procedures would be required include installing, lubricating, cleaning and unjamming machines or equipment, and making adjustments or tool changes. Definition of players. Number one, authorized employee. An employee who locks or tags machines or equipment in order to perform servicing or maintenance. This employee is called authorized employee. Affected employee. An employee who is required to use machines or equipment on which servicing is performed under the lockout tagout standard, or who perform other job responsibilities in an area where such servicing is performed. Other employees. All employees who are or may be in an area where energy control procedure may be utilized. Responsibilities of affected employees. Never interfere or tamper with a lock or tag. Stay clear of the area and as much as possible. Never attempt to assist. Report any unusual situation or unsafe condition to your supervisor. Falling, impact, acceleration and lifting hazards. Cause of fall. In a typical year, more than 10,000 workers will lose their life due to fall. More than 16% of all disabling work-related injuries are the result of fall. Clearly, falls are a major concern of health and safety professionals. Following are the primary cause of falls. Number one, a falling object on the work surface, a design flaw in a walking surface, slippery surface, and individual physical condition. Kinds of fall: trip fall, stump and fall, step and fall, slip and fall. All these are the examples of different kinds of fall. Number one, trip and fall. Fall can be divided into the following four classes. These are all four classes. Number one, trip and fall. Accident occurs when workers encounter an unseen foreign object in their path When a foot strikes the object, the workers trip and fall. This is called trip and fall. Stump and fall. Accident occurs when a worker foot suddenly meets a sticky surface or a defect in the walking surface. Step and fall. What is step and fall? Accidents occurs when the foot encounters an unexpected step down. This can also happen when an employee thinks he or she reached the bottom of the stairs when in reality there is one more step. Slip and fall. Accidents occur when the worker's center of gravity is suddenly thrown out of balance. That is, an oily spot causes a foot to shoot out from under the worker. Here are some coefficient of friction between surface, floor and shoes. 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. The categories are very slippery and hazardous, slippery and hazardous, slippery but not hazardous, good traction. And these are the coefficient of friction between these surfaces. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 surfaces, and between these 4 surfaces the coefficient of friction is lie from 0.2 to 0.4. Walking and slipping. Factors that decrease traction. When the surface is oily, wet coefficient of concentrate drops from 0.43 to 0.37, which moves it one category down on traction. Consequently, good housekeeping reduces slip and fall hazards. Oil, grease, soap, cleaning solvents turn a safe surface into a dangerous zone. To counter that, rubber sole should decrease slipping hazards. Preventing slips. Slip prevention should be a part of company's health and safety program. Example, choose right material for pathways. Practice good housekeeping. Clear from oil, grease when mopping the area. Rope off the area or erect warning signs. Require non-skid footwear. Review and acceptance of walkways, reconditioning of walkways, employee footwear program, specify type of footwear on different type of walking surfaces, inspection, audit, including test, report, suggestion by authorized safety officer, ladder safety. Jobs that involve the use of ladder introduce their own sets of safety problems. One of which is an increased potential for falls. The National Safety Council recommends that ladders be inspected before every use and that employees who use them follow a set of standard rules. The National Safety Council recommends the following when inspecting a ladder. Is the ladder strong enough? Number 1. What do the label says about the weight, capacity and application? Look for the following conditions: cracks on side rails, loose rungs, rails or braces damage, connections between rungs and rails. Check for heat damage and corrosion. Check wooden ladders for moisture that might cause them to conduct electricity. Check metal ladders for burrs and sharp edges. Check fiberglass ladder for signs of blooming, deterioration of exposed fiberglass. Do's and don'ts of ladder use. Here is a list of do's and don'ts of ladder use. Number 1, check slipperiness on shoes and ladder rungs. Limit ladder to one person at a time. Secure ladder firmly at top and bottom. Do apply 4 to 1 ratio at least. Face ladder during climbing up and down. Don't lean too far to either side while working. Don't lean ladder against a fragile, unstable surface. Don't let other people to enter the premises of ladder, maybe by placing barrier. Should be standing at least 3 rungs down from the top. Belt up during working on ladder. Ladder 4 to 1 rule. What is ladder 4 to 1 rule? Make sure you can set up your ladder at the required angle. You can see the diagram. Using the 4 to 1 rule, for every 4 feet 1.2 meters up, place the base of your ladder 1 foot 0.3 meter from the wall or upper support that it rests against. So this is the rule which is called 4 to 1 rule for ladder. Protection from falling, acceleration objects. Potential hazards. Impact to the head. Falling or flying objects are common cause of head injuries. Also, falling or walking into hard objects can cause head injuries. These injuries include neck sprains, contusions, and skull fracture. Electrical shocks. Accidents involving electricity results in electrical shocks and burns, splashes, spills, and drips. Toxic liquids such as acids, caustics, and molten metals can irritate and burn the eye and skin. As a rule of thumb, hard heads should resist penetration and deflect blows to the head, have a suspension system that can absorb the force of impact, serve as an insulator against electrical shocks when warranted, be water resistant and slow burning, shield the scalp, face, neck, and shoulders. So, protection from falling acceleration objects, we can use all these things.